All right, so in my last video, I spent the better half of an hour walking through the story of this thing. Every turn, every question it raised, every strange little moment that made me stop and stare at the screen for a second. If you sat through all of that with me, congratulations, you've already done most of the heavy lifting. Now we get to the other side of things, the gameplay. See, Resident Evil Requiem is the 9th mainline entry in the Resident Evil series. And I'm not exaggerating when I say this might be one of the most deliberate attempts I've ever seen to satisfy a fan base this intense. And Resident Evil fans are intense, there's no doubt about that. This is a series that's been alive since 1996. Multiple generations of players have grown up with it, people have very specific ideas about what this series should be, and somehow Capcom keeps navigating that minefield. Now, I find myself genuinely jealous of the way Capcom handles the franchise. They watch their audience, they listen, they experiment, and when something works, they double down on it in a way that feels like they're steering the ship instead of just reacting to every comment section on Earth. I wish Konami would take notes, I truly do. Because when you look at what Capcom has managed to do with Resident Evil over the last several years, it feels like a studio that understands the balance between respecting the past and actually moving the series forward. Meanwhile, Konami seems perfectly comfortable wandering off into whatever strange direction they feel like this week. And they do it over and over again. But Resident Evil Requiem does bring up a very interesting question. How much is too much when you're trying to please fans? Because the game clearly knows what people want. You can feel it in the design, you can see it in the systems. There are moments where it almost feels like Capcom opened a giant notebook titled Things Resident Evil Fans Won't Shut Up About and just started checking off all the fucking boxes. And that can go one of two ways. Some people will tell you that fans deserve that players are the ones buying the games, supporting the franchise and keeping it alive for decades. If developers want loyalty, they should probably listen to what the audience tells them for what they enjoy. Others will tell you the opposite, that chasing fan approval is one of the fastest ways to completely derail a game, because the internet's full of people who think they know exactly how a series should work, until they actually get what they asked for. Then suddenly everyone hates it. So that's what this part of the video is about. We're going to step away from the story for a bit and take a look at the machinery under the hood, the mechanics, the pacing, the systems that actually make this thing work moment to moment. And because the real question sitting in front of Resident Evil Requiem isn't whether it understands its audience, it clearly does. The question is whether giving the fans this much control over the recipe actually made it better, or if Capcom finally gave it too much of what they asked for. Firstly, let's start with Grace. You load in and the camera snaps into first person. It's the same perspective you had in Resident Evil 7, the same one in the Village. They just carried it forward. If you played either of those games, you know exactly what the camera does to the atmosphere. It pulls everything right up in your face. There's no comfortable distance between you and whatever's about to happen. And personally, I welcomed that immediately. I've always been a fan of the first-person shift Capcom made back in 7. Some people never warmed up to it, but for me it was something that Resident Evil hadn't done really at all. It forces you to exist in a space with the threat itself. You weren't watching a character deal with something, you were standing there with it. Grace's sections lean hard on that idea, and I love it. Resources are low, almost right away. Not, I'll manage low. I'm talking about the kind of low where every bullet feels like you're spending money you don't actually have. That pressure changes how you move through the environment. You start checking corners slower, you start watching doors longer, you start thinking about hiding spots before you even know if you need them. The stealth mechanics tie directly into that. She's not built like Leon, she's not built like Jill. This game doesn't want you charging down hallways and clearing rooms. She's a walking liability. She's anxious as hell, she stumbles, she fumbles. It was one of those things where storyline wise I found no value in her. However, when it comes to gameplay, to make things scarier, it helps when your character's falling apart. However, they did it too much and it almost started, as I mentioned before in previous videos, it started telegraphing things, and I didn't like that too much. However, the fact that she is essentially defenseless meant you had to think outside the box. I like when horror games force you into a corner where you have to think outside the box. That's the part that works for me. Once you accept that you're not the dominant force in the room, your brain starts going into strange places. You start thinking about situations like you would in real life. Not like a video game puzzle, like an actual problem you really don't want to deal with head on. At one point, I even tried to get clever with it. There's a moment where the girl is kind of moving through the area, and I thought maybe I could use the darkness against her. So I took inspiration from that movie Pitch Black, you know, the one where the monsters are only available in the dark and they see you. So I lure her into a room and I wait there until till the time is right and basically hit the light switch, and maybe I burn her alive, for coming too close to me, and so on and so forth. It made sense in my head. In practice, it was a total failure, but that's not really the point. The point is the game had me thinking in any kind of way like that in the first place. I was actually treating the encounter like something I needed to survive, not something I needed to solve. And when a horror game lets you operate in that mindset, it's doing something right. Grace's sections live inside that space. You're cautious, you're improvising, you're testing ideas that you're not even sure will work, and they didn't work a lot of the times. Sometimes they do, sometimes they just don't though. But the fear of that interaction is what drives the whole thing. And that feeling carries you through most of her gameplay style before the game eventually shifts gears. Grace also carries one of the stranger mechanics in the entire game, the blood device. Early on, you're given this little piece of tech that collects infected blood from enemies and converts it into crafting material. The idea is simple enough. You drain blood, the device processes it, and that resource lets you construct items on the fly, health items, utility tools. But here's where things get a little funny. Now, the serums that you can inject into infected enemies and cause them to rupture, I can follow that logic. The game establishes early that the infection behaves in volatile ways, so some kind of destabilizing compound that reacts violently with infected tissue, sure, that makes sense. I mean, as far as my science degree goes, which I don't have. That fits with the weird science in Resident Evil, though. It's good. Molotov cocktails, same story. Bottle, fuel, fire, I get it. That one doesn't require a PhD. But bullets? Grace turning harvested zombie blood into handgun ammunition is where the whole thing starts to wobble just a bit. Because the moment you stop and think about it, the image becomes kind of ridiculous. You're standing there with a handheld blood vacuum, you're sucking up infected fluids, and somehow that turns into perfectly formed rounds ready to load into a firearm. No casings, no primer, just kind of blood magic. Resident Evil's always played fast and loose with science, like really fast and loose. That's part of its charm, I guess. But this particular mechanic feels like it's one of those systems that exists more for gameplay convenience than for anything else grounded in the world itself. And honestly, I don't even think the game needed it. The tension during Grace's sections already comes from the scarcity. When you're low on resources, every drawer matters, every locker, every dusty shelf in a forgotten room. It suddenly becomes more interesting because you're hoping to find something useful inside of it. That's classic Resident Evil design. So when the game gives you a device that can basically manufacture whatever you need as long as you vacuumed enough blood off the floor, it starts to undercut that feeling just a little bit. Instead of surviving off of what you discover in the environment, you're occasionally standing there doing inventory math. Do I have enough blood to make ammo? Do I save it for healing? Do I convert it into something else? It turns survival horror into a resource conversion system. It's not a deal breaker or anything. The mechanic works fine. It gives the players flexibility. And there are moments where that flexibility is genuinely useful when things get chaotic, but thematically it's not hard to laugh a little bit when you realize Grace is basically crafting bullets out of zombie juice. Sometimes simpler systems are stronger. A few well-placed items in the world, a couple of tense searches through dark rooms, that formula's carried the series for decades. Grace would probably just have been fine surviving off of whatever she could find laying around. Also, it should be noted the stalker enemies deserve some credit here. Resident Evil's been leaning on this design philosophy for a while now. Instead of throwing waves of enemies at you, the game introduces a single presence that kind of changes how you move through the environment. This has been a constant problem that forces you to think differently about the space you're in. Grace's sections do this several times, and each stalker actually has a distinct gimmick. One of them hates light. That immediately changes how you approach the environment. Suddenly you're paying attention to switches, lamps, or whatever source of illumination the game gives you. Half the time you're truly wondering if this is actual sources of light that are keeping you protected, or if you're just in some weird glitchy area. You just can't help but wonder, am I seen here or am I not? I like that. Dark areas became safe pockets while lit rooms became places you want to move through quickly. Or in regards to the girl, it was in vice versa. You had to literally stay in the light because moving into the darkness was the biggest problem. If you were in the darkness, she could see you better. Another one of those stalker types is massive. He's as big as a house. He's not just a big enemy, but he's wide, he's heavy. He's built in a way that interacts with the actual architecture of the level. Hallways that normally feel cramped suddenly become tactical spaces. Corners matter, door frames matter. You start thinking about how much room something needs to move through the environment, and that gives you ways to maneuver around without direct confrontation. And then there's the cook. Now this one is less about physical space and more about behavior. He's loud, unhinged, and very clearly not interested in being disturbed. The moment you interrupt whatever he's doing, he becomes the problem in the room. It creates this strange tension where sometimes the safest thing to do is simply stay out of his fucking way. He's got a routine and he plans on sticking to it. What I liked about all these encounters is that none of them felt like they existed purely for combat. They act more like moving barriers, natural impasses to show up during your attempts to escape different sections of the map. Instead of locking a door or throwing a puzzle at you, the game drops actual presences into your environment and lets that presence control the pace of the area. You're not solving a puzzle or putting some weird key into a weird diagram of a statue. You're waiting for the right moment to move. Each one gets its time in the spotlight too. The game doesn't stack them on top of each other or overuse them to the point where they lose their impact. They show up, complicate your escape, force you to adapt, and then the story moves forward. It's a simple idea, but it really fucking works. Because when the player is already low on resources and the camera's shoved right up into the character's perspective, even one enemy wandering the halls can turn a quiet section of the game into something terrifying. And I loved Grace's section just for that. And I could even get past her heavy breathing to enjoy what I was playing. But then there's Leon. Now, the moment Leon Kennedy enters the picture, the game changes its personality entirely. Up to that point, the experience is tense, Grace is cautious, resources are thin, enemies feel dangerous because you know you're not really equipped to deal with them directly. Every encounter carries that small moment where you stop and think about whether or not you should even be there at all. Leon doesn't think like that. He's not built like that. Leon kicks doors open and starts solving problems, physically. And to be clear, this is not a criticism of the character himself. This is what Leon's been doing for a long time now. Ever since Resident Evil 4, he's existed on the action side of the franchise. He's the guy who walks directly into the nightmare and decides he's going to beat it into submission. He's like Chris Redfield, only smoother. So when he shows up in Requiem, every system around him shifts. Those stalker enemies that spent the early parts of the game turning hallways into tense little survival scenarios, when Leon's involved, they stop feeling like predators and start feeling like mini bosses. They're still dangerous, sure, but the tone changes from avoid this thing to how do I kill this thing? Because Leon's equipped to do exactly that. He carries a magnum loaded with specialized antiviral whatever rounds, not just a sidearm, but the kind of weapon that exists specifically to drop something that would normally take a small arsenal to bring down. The kind of weapon that tells the player immediately that the game is comfortable letting you fight back. And then there's the hand axe. Grace hides, Grace sneaks, Grace waits for enemies to move on so she can slip past them. Leon walks in with a melee weapon and starts clearing space. It's not subtle at all. It's not careful. It's direct. And all you got to do is kind of just, smooth the edges off and you're back to using an infinite hand axe. That perspective reinforces that whole shift though. Grace, her sections are first person, just like Resident Evil 7 and Village. That perspective pulls the camera right up into your face. You see every dark corner, every doorway, every shape moving in the background. It's intimate and uncomfortable in a way that works perfectly for the horror genre. Leon's sections swing the camera back into third person. Suddenly you're looking over that shoulder again. The framing resembles Resident Evil 4 more than anything else. You can see the space around you. You can track enemies easy. You can have wider awareness for what's happening. It feels familiar. And it also brings a different kind of confidence with it. Leon's inventory doesn't help. Grace spends large stretches of the game trying to make every item count, even when she's making up random blood bullets. Leon, on the other hand, seems capable of carrying enough equipment to supply a small military unit. Ammo, explosives, weapons, healing items. The man could probably outfit a jumbo jet with the amount of gear he keeps on him. The tension is gone. When I say gone, it's gone. And then the one-liners. Leon's always been the king of awful dialogue. That's part of how he works and operates. I get it. But he drops sarcastic remarks in the middle of situations that would realistically leave most people speechless. The franchise has leaned into that quality for decades, but good lord, it's top notch in this one. Inside the game that's trying to build a horror atmosphere around Grace, those moments just hit differently. When Leon cracks jokes after killing something grotesque, the tone of the room shifts. What was supposed to be frightening a few minutes ago now feels like a part of an action movie. He's a 90s hero. I guess that's what Leon has turned into, and that's what he turns the game into. Whenever Grace gets into real trouble, Leon tends to appear right on schedule. Whether it's him sniping on a crashed helicopter or him showing up just in time to make sure the girl doesn't drag her into the, darkness of a hallway. A shot rings out, the creature that had the upper hand suddenly collapses, and here's Leon, the rescue, the guy who shows up to stabilize a situation that has spiraled out of control. From a narrative perspective, it works fine. Leon's a veteran. Grace most certainly is not. It makes sense that the experienced agent would be the one pulling people out of danger. From a gameplay perspective, though, I gotta be honest, it removes a sense that anything truly terrible is gonna happen. If Leon exists in the room, the odds suddenly feel a hell of a lot better. That's the other side of the Resident Evil coin, though. Grace represents the horror side of the franchise, at least in this game. The vulnerability and uncertainty, the slow pacing that forces you to think carefully about every decision you make. Leon represents the opposite. He's a power fantasy, the character who can walk through the same environment and dismantle threats that terrified someone else 10 minutes ago. He's walking fan service. And Capcom knows exactly what they're doing with him. I mean, Leon's sections are loaded with the kind of sequences that feel pulled straight out of an action era of Resident Evil. There's motorcycle chases that turn into full-blown set pieces. There's a linear boss encounter where the goal is less about survival and more about spectacle. At one point, you're fighting enemies that have access to mortar-style weaponry, which pushes the game into, I don't even know, like Call of Duty? I don't know. The moments are flashy and they're loud and they're entertaining in their own way, but they don't belong in the same emotional space as Grace's gameplay at all. I think this is where the real design decision becomes visible. Capcom clearly wanted to keep the horror structure that Resident Evil 7 and Village built. Those games proved that the franchise could still be frightening when it focused on atmosphere and vulnerability. Players responded to that direction. It worked. Maybe not so much with Village, but it definitely worked. At the same time, though, the company knows that a large portion of the fanbase still loves the action side of Resident Evil. The side built by Resident Evil 4. Let's be honest, as soon as Resident Evil 4 became what it was, there was no turning back. The side where Leon Kennedy's suplexing monsters and firing magnums like he's in an 80s film. Requiem tries to keep both. Grace carries that horror and Leon carries the action. The premise is supposed to be simple. In theory, the balance allows Capcom to satisfy everyone without sacrificing what made the recent games effective. The problem is that fan service has gravity. Once Leon enters the story with a magnum, an axe, a warehouse worth of inventory space, and a habit of blowing up anything that moves, the horror side of that experience has a hard time competing with that kind of energy. Fear relies on vulnerability. Leon does not feel vulnerable. Even though they made him infected with a virus in this story, he still did not feel vulnerable. And I'm going to be honest with you, Capcom tried something similar years ago with Resident Evil 6, in my opinion. That game leaned so heavily into action spectacle across multiple campaigns, explosions, chase sequences, combat all the time. It delivered fan service in massive quantities, but the horror identity of the series drowned in the process. Requiem feels like a course correction. Instead of going all in on action again, Capcom divided the experience quite literally. Grace gets the fear, Leon gets the spectacle. Both sides of the franchise are present, but they're separated into different play styles. It's a clever compromise, but compromises always come with trade-offs. Because the moment Leon steps on the screen, the player remembers that the nightmare can be punched in the face. And once that idea settles in, it's hard for any fear to start generating again. If I were going to give this game a rating out of 1 through 10, I would honestly say this game is a solid 5 out of 10. And the reason I say that, whether you agree or not, I'm sure I'll hear about it in the comments, we only got half the experience on both sides. If you want to play a full version of what Leon went through in Requiem, go play Resident Evil 4. If you want to play a full version of what Grace went through, go play Resident Evil 7. But it wasn't enough of either side. Instead, it was the combination of both mixed with a ton of fan service. It was everything sprinkled into one. I used the example in my last video where it's a steak and ice cream sandwich. You love steak, you love ice cream. You don't need them both in one bite on a sandwich. And a lot of what Capcom had to offer with Requiem was a sample of everything good about every part of the franchise forever. You got this, you got that, you got these items, you got this moment, you got these action sequences, you got this scary sequence, you got everything, but it was all smashed into one. And so even people that say nothing but praises about this game are mad about individual parts that seem to be sprinkled throughout the game. Some people love the game, but they hate the orphanage flashback. Some people love the game, but they think the motorcycle chase is stupid. There are so many different sequences that people are cherry picking out that they don't like. And while they may say in the end, despite the fact that I did not like that, the part that I did love makes the game good, there are a lot of people that can't play this game over and over again like they did with all the other Resident Evils. And playthroughs and various playthroughs and timed playthroughs and things like that were something that Resident Evil is known for. It's a staple. And because people don't find themselves wanting to go back, it's very telling about how this game went or where this game went. This game was a sample of everything good on the tray. Everything on the trolley came up and you got a taste of everything and it was all good, but you only got one bite before they moved on. And that's what this game was. It had its moments, it had its times, it even had a gimmick you liked or two, but it also had a gimmick you hated. And for me, I loved all of Grace's moments in the game and they built to this tension, but once I got to Leon, I may as well have flipped over to Street Fighter or Devil May Cry, because let's be honest, at this point, Leon is now Dante. If you made it all the way through the story breakdown and stuck around for the gameplay side of things, I do appreciate you hanging out with me for this one. These longer videos take a bit of digging and a lot of talking, so it generally helps when people are willing to sit through the whole ride. If you enjoyed the video, do the usual YouTube ritual for me. Hit the like button, subscribe if you haven't already, and drop a comment below. I read through them and they help the video get pushed out to more people who might be interested in this kind of breakdown. For anyone new here, this channel is mostly about digging into games and the stories around them. Sometimes this means deep dives into lore, sometimes reviews, sometimes it's just looking at strange moments in the industry that most people forgot about. If it's connected to gaming history, development stories, or weird corners of the medium, chances are it ends up being talked about here. But thanks again to everyone who's already subscribed and keep coming back for the videos. It helps more than you realize. I'll see you in the next one.